So Spool claimed a long time ago that if games were a good value, they were $1 an hour, meaning if you paid $60 for a game, you could play it for 60 hours.
I don't know if that means Minute is overpriced or if that most of the games are underpriced. And that the entire
It was awesome. It was crazy, but for $60, yeah, it was too damn short.
Enamored with the game's vibrant visuals and intense gameplay, we're thus disappointed to learn that a single playthrough can be finished in a few hours.
We are having a great time after forking over quite a bit of cash, only to see the credits roll after a few hours of gameplay. That's just not right, you know.
There are a lot of reasons to like or dislike a game. Gameplay and mechanics, pacing, story, graphics and art direction, sound design, music. The list of subjective reasons we love and hate different games goes on and on. And us being human beings, that means that when we come into disagreement, we of course try to find more objective ways of measuring a game's value. One of the most persistent attempts at doing so has been the practice of judging a game based on how many hours of gameplay you can milk out of it per dollar you had to spend to obtain it in the first place. Essentially, we like to give our games a fuel economy rating. There's just one problem. Dollar-to-hour ratios don't make sense. In fact, it's specifically when you look at them on an objective level that you start to see the cracks in the ethos. So why do we use them to try and objectively judge video games? At first glance, dollar-to-hour ratios sound like an eminently logical way to go about making smart decisions as a consumer. After all, it doesn't take a whole lot of math to come to the conclusion that more time for less money means a better return for the buyer. But in practice, this metric has aged poorly in today's market, is founded on self-defeating, contradictory logic that is not helpful for informing your purchases, and worse, limits the kind of games developers can make due to audience expectations, and is an overall reductive argument that defines a game's quality by boiling it down to one of its least defining aspects. Now for those taking to the comment section already, trust me, I understand the impulse to try and find some objective way to measure the quality of an individual purchase. I used to live by these ratios myself. Just a few years ago even, I was always doing the math, obsessively counting my game time and refusing to put a game down until I had milked my money's worth out of it. I've been there. I get it. And I understand that everybody has their own level of disposable income. If you're broke as hell but have a ton of time on your hands, yeah, a game that gives you the most bang for your buck is probably a priority. But what if I told you that dollar-to-hour ratios, a metric born almost entirely out of an attempt at economic sensibility, are counterintuitive even on an economic basis? If the primary decider of a game's worth is how much content you can squeeze out of your developers while giving as little money back as possible, Warframe is the greatest 10 out of 10 game to come out in practically a decade. It's free to play, has nigh infinite content, and if you farm enough and get into the trading scene, you can even acquire real money-only items without ever dropping a cent. In a lot of ways, Warframe and other games like it are the ultimate dollar-to-hour games, because they actually have an inverse dollar-to-hour ratio. The less money you spend on them, the longer you can play before you run out of things to do. And I put hundreds of hours into Warframe back when I had time. Don't get me wrong, I like that game. But there's a reason I haven't played it in 2 years. There are like 10 other games I want to play coming out every month. I have a backlog like 200 games long. And let's not even talk about my Steam wishlist. With all this other stuff to do, can you kind of see why I'd rather finally find out why everybody's obsessed with Celeste instead of spending another 100 hours grinding power cores so I can finally get the next level of Serration? Warframe is a good game with interesting and cool weapons and characters and thousands of hours of content. But for me, it's not great. And when there are thousands of games coming out every year, you don't have to settle for good. You can buy revolutionary. You could even buy revolutionary games that are also long. Look at Breath of the Wild. Look at Persona 5. Look at Divinity Original Sin 2. Look at all the classic Final Fantasy games that are permanent cornerstones of the gaming lexicon. And that's what makes me feel like hour-to-dollar ratios are kind of bullshit. Short of a nuclear apocalypse knocking out the internet and leaving you with only your hard copy games and a gas generator, you will never run out of games to play. When there are virtually unlimited quality gaming experiences out there at almost every price point, including free, how much time an individual game consumes ceases to matter, and it most definitely should not be the deciding factor in what you purchase. It should be the quality of the time you spend, not the quantity, that informs your decision. But you're probably not convinced, so let's look at this through a more objective lens. The big comparison people always like to make when purchasing games is to the cost of a movie ticket. But what about Amazon ebooks? At the time of this writing, there are currently 388 ebooks on Amazon that cost under $1. A lot of them are free. You could spend years reading 400 books, and when combined with the price of a Kindle, it would cost you less than it would just to get a current-gen console or computer to play a game on in the first place. Or better yet, what about daytime soap operas? You don't even need to pay for cable. All you need is a TV and a $20 converter box, and bam, General Hospital every morning. If you're just looking for a way to fill as many hours as possible in a monetarily efficient manner, there are forms of media that give vastly better time-to-dollar ratios than any video game will. When you consider the price of entry between consoles, computer parts, monitors, peripherals, controllers, TVs, speakers, all that basic infrastructure stuff, before we even get to play a game at all, we are all fans of one of the most expensive hobbies we could have possibly picked short of buying our own yachts to go deep-sea fishing on. When you have free music players like Spotify, Netflix for less than $15 a month, and multiple anime websites let you legally watch entire shows, some of which are longer than almost any game you'll ever play, for free, there are far more economical options for entertainment. But here we all are. Why? Let's take this a step further and look at free-to-play games. In today's gaming market, there are more free-to-play options currently available than you could see to completion in a lifetime. And if you manage to find my tiny little speck of a channel in the massive ocean that is YouTube, it's probably a safe bet that you're into video games enough to have bought one with actual money in the past year. You could have played nothing but free-to-play games and enjoyed an unbeatable dollar-to-hour ratio, and yet you still decided to give a developer some of your money. Why? I don't think I'm blowing any minds by pointing out that the obvious reason is personal taste. Maybe it's the mechanics, maybe the promise of a cool story, but whatever the reason, we decided that we wanted that game badly enough to throw money at it. But what is less universally recognized is that personal taste vastly outweighs the cost or length of a game. And for some reason, this sense of personal taste sometimes doesn't seem to extend to shorter games. In all of these examples, people consciously choose a more expensive product because they believe that product will be more enjoyable to experience than the alternatives, that the quality of their time spent will be higher. But all of a sudden, when it comes to games that only have a few hours of content in them, we draw a line. And that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. If you already would rather play video games than watch a daytime soap opera, even if that soap opera could consume more time and cost less, and you already would rather pay money for a game that is more to your taste than whatever free mobile drivel came out this week, even though the mobile game is free and is designed to last longer, why wouldn't you rather fork over a few dollars for a superior game, even if it's only 2 hours? The fact of the matter is that we're saying one thing while doing another. We at once both say that a game has to be X length to be worth its $10 or $20 or $60 price tag, and use this assertion to shame shorter games for daring to ask for as reasonable a cost as $10, while also ignoring countless options that have better economic value in favor of the latest $60 AAA releases. When you consider the prevalence, and more importantly the growing quality of free games, the decision to spend money at all is, in fact, an optional choice based on highly subjective desires that have little to do with the game's runtime. The logic behind dollar-to-hour ratios is self-defeating, because you're already acting in contradiction to the spirit of the credo just by having spent a dollar amount to measure your hours played against in the first place. And sure, it is perfectly valid for your personal taste to skew towards longer games with lots of content. But that taste isn't born of some desire to get the most content out of your developers for the least amount of money possible. It's because some people simply enjoy having something to be lost in and become a part of for hundreds of hours. I understand full well the feeling of just falling in love with some piece of media and wanting more and more and more. And when you finally run out, there's just this void left where you don't know what to do next. That feeling is not bad. Being passionate about something and wanting more of it is not bad. But even the most diehard fans of supremely long games probably aren't going to try and say that something like Candy Crush or Clash of Clans, games whose entire raison d'etre is to consume as much of your time and money as possible, can stand on the same level as something like Nier Automata, a 30-some hour game that was one of the smartest, most incredible releases of 2017. Dollar-to-hour ratios are inextricably attached to and ruled by the idea that a game's value should be judged by how much time it absorbs, not the quality or kind of experience it provides. And that's what I have a problem with. When people decide not to like a thing because it doesn't pass an arbitrary line of having enough stuff, when people decide a game has to be X long to be worthwhile, that's when we officially have a problem. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't really be upset enough to make a video just because a few people decided they wanted to use outdated and faulty logic to justify their buying habits. The real problem here is that this behavior is prevalent enough that it has been influencing how video games across the entire industry are designed and consumed for years. And our medium has grown beyond it to the point that that influence has become actively harmful to the art form and is holding it back from moving forward. Let's start by taking a look at Minute, a game that I see far more discussion about surrounding its length and not its gameplay. Minute is this little indie game with the premise that you need to set off on a globe-trotting adventure to remove a curse that's been placed on you. The nature of this curse, however, is that every 60 seconds, you die. And with each 60-second life, it's your objective to inch yourself another step down the critical path. The nature of Minute means that it is a very small game. It only lasts an hour. If you go through the game again on New Game Plus mode, it lasts 2. Depending on how good you are at ferreting out all its secrets, you could probably 100% it in 3 or 4. Minute also costs $10. If you just do a little bit of long-form math and carry the 0, you'll find that according to dollar-to-hour ratios, this game is an absolute waste of your money. But Minute is an almost universally critically recognized game, and I've personally found that even when the game isn't directly utilizing its trademark mechanic in a puzzle or to further the narrative, it fundamentally alters how you think about literally everything you do in the game by just existing. There is no dithering around in this game. Every foray works towards an objective. Every life has a specific goal. Sometimes that goal is just to explore a new area and figure out what's out there. Other times you're racing to do an objective at a specific spot. One of Minute's greatest strengths is its brevity. One of my favorite things about Minute is that the developers realized the limits of how far they could push their idea, and had the restraint to not try and stuff in more. It wasn't until the final 5 or 10 minutes of the game that I started feeling like Minute had run dry on interesting ideas or had any fat on it, and right on cue, the game ended. Minute is a tightly wound and enjoyable experience, but imagine if it had been 10 hours long to quote-unquote justify its price tag. Considering the game's ideas were barely enough to sustain it for an hour or two as is, making it 10 times longer could have only resulted in it becoming a miserably bloated slog, which is the exact fate that befell another game, Doom 2016. I'm sorry, what? You heard me right. Doom's campaign might make it one of the most beloved releases of 2016, and one of my personal favorite shooters to come out in years, but a valid criticism that has been repeatedly leveled against it is that about 2/3 of the way through its 15-hour or so adventure, the game starts turning into a repetitive slog. Doom 2016 has, also rightly, received heaps upon heaps of praise for its insanely entertaining core combat loop that focuses on constant forward motion and aggression. But so much of that core engagement also owes its success to the overall feeling of breakneck momentum that is also present in Doom's overarching metagame. It's an impeccably paced arms race between the player getting newer and bigger guns, and the game introducing newer and bigger enemies to topple with them. And that arms race hits its peak right here.
Demonic presence at unsafe levels. Lockdown ended.
Outside of bosses, 2 Barons of Hell are the greatest challenge the game ever throws at you, and Doom first does so at the 2/3 mark. And starting with this moment, Doom proceeds to repeat this challenge again, and again, and again. All momentum in that arms race completely ceases, until eventually the final 2 levels, essentially the final hour and a half of the game, are all a blur of identical encounters always capped off by another duo of Barons. In other words, Doom 2016 keeps going after it runs out of ideas, and it shows. The final stretch of Doom's campaign is one of the largest complaints most regularly leveled against an otherwise fantastic experience. But it kind of has to be that long. 15 hours sounds meaty compared to something like Call of Duty or Titanfall 2, but pales in comparison to the sheer content sponges of every open-world Ubisoft title that was asking the same $60 price. Titles which themselves were, and arguably still are, incredibly bloated with a cavalcade of random activities splattered across the map Pollock style. If you want to snag the dollar-to-hour crowd, you can't push a $60 title with only 10 hours of content. And obviously, I'm not just picking on Doom 2016. You can find examples of padded-out games ranging from Dragon Age Inquisition, with its overwhelming tide of fetch quests, to Rage, another id title that literally sent you back through the same levels you'd already completed a second time to complete arbitrary side quests. I bring up Doom specifically because it is a game that arguably stands at the very apex of one of the most crowded genres in video gaming, and yet even as one of 2016's best and most visible titles, it suffers from bloat. However, there are even more releases that suffer from similar woes coming from the exact opposite direction. While a game like Doom may be a short game padded out to make itself longer, what about long games that work better when they're short? The Destiny games are meant to be massive time sinks, by design. From the very beginning, Destiny 2 has been marketed as a lifestyle game, something you can log into and have something to do every day of your life until Destiny 3 comes out. Destiny 2 gets compared to Warframe a lot, and for good reason. It's targeting the exact same market, and it's a dollar-to-hour wet dream for all of the same reasons that Warframe is. Or, at least, on paper, it was supposed to be. The flip side of all that, however, is that the game is designed to make you play every day. The developers have built Destiny 2 with the express intent of making sure that you have as much to do in that game as possible. But the reality is that Destiny 2's base game only really had about 20 hours of meat on its bones. Once you beat the Leviathan raid, there wasn't much to do. But Destiny 2 still designed that meat around a skeleton that was meant for 200 hours of play, and that skeleton frequently showed through. But between its tight gunplay, some really cool exotics, and an honest-to-God, really fun raid, Destiny 2 was actually pretty enjoyable for those 20 hours up until you hit that wall. I would argue that Destiny 2 is actually a good game. Or at least, it was, before all the controversies and the expansion, and yeah, okay, people have a lot of reasons for not liking this one. But most of those reasons come back to the game artificially trying to stretch its playtime. Curse of Osiris got panned because its new procedurally generated area was repetitive, and you were expected to keep playing it long after it had gotten boring. Bungie took flack repeatedly when they got caught doing shenanigans like slowing down your XP gain, and thus forcing you to grind more if you wanted those bright engrams. All of these decisions either traded quality or player goodwill, in an attempt to generate more playtime. Many of them were actively hostile or borderline exploitative to the player. And I'm not here to shame you for enjoying lifestyle games or to say that it's impossible to make a good one. I'm here to say that when a game is made, by design, to artificially stretch an experience out as much as possible, it inevitably dilutes that experience as well. And a dollar-to-hour mentality is not just blind to these tactics, it actively encourages developers to engage in them. In all three of these examples, the irrational mentality of hunting for the best dollar-to-hour ratio negatively influences both audience expectations and developer dogma. For developers in particular, short games that naturally have a low dollar-to-hour ratio are discouraged, which not only stunts the growth of what kind of experiences our medium can produce, but also directly leads to inferior, diluted games. And that limitation is doubly true for indie developers, who are currently creating many of the most creative, interesting, and just plain revolutionary experiences on the market today, and often don't have the resources to create a 100-hour game. There are a lot of other reasons to like or dislike a game. Gameplay and mechanics, pacing, story, graphics and art direction, sound design, music. The list of subjective reasons we love and hate different games goes on and on. And when we have all these better, more important ways to judge a game, it doesn't make any sense that we insist on deciding its quality by its quantity. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this bonus feature of First 5. The entire point of this channel is to look for games that will respect your time, don't pad themselves, and can be finished over a few play sessions. This channel is built on a lot of the arguments and sentiments that I just finished outlining, and you, yes you, can help build it into something bigger. If everything I've said has convinced you that dollar-to-hour ratios don't make sense, or you already agreed with me to begin with, please subscribe to my channel, where you'll find weekly videos reviewing games by asking if they're worth your time, not your money. I'll see you all next time.